One of the reasons that I wanted to start this podcast is because I love talking to people in spaces or industries and careers that I know absolutely nothing about and learning from them. And reinventability is all about that, right? It's about opening up our perspective. And so I'm really excited for my conversation, my upcoming conversation with my guest today, because he has spent the last 25 years in sales, doing sales, training salespeople. And as I was just saying to him before we started recording, sales has always been this like big, black, scary box for me and many other entrepreneurs I know, until I realized that it's actually all about human connection and empathy. And so I'm really excited to dive into that. So my guest today is Doug Weaver, who for the past 26 years, I'm looking at my notes, not 25, 26 years, he's worked with over 700 leading companies, including every company you know. I was looking at the list: NBC Universal, Spotify, the New York Times. And he's trained their salespeople on the tech side about what it means to sell and what it means to be great at it and how to have great strategy behind it. So I'm really excited to talk to an expert like Doug about what sales means and what we can all learn about that and much more. And with that, Doug, welcome to Reinventability.
I cannot tell you, Natalie, how much I have been looking forward to this.
Oh, what a fun thing to hear. Thank you. I'm usually like the super giddy one with my guests. Me too. Me too. All right, Doug, I want to dive right in with what you just heard me talk about. So I've been an entrepreneur for probably similar to what you've been doing with your company, about 25 years. And whenever the word would come up, like sales, like I
Mhm.
would, I would feel this like inner tightening, be like, sales. Oh my God, I have to convince people to buy things and every entrepreneur that I know like freezes up. And even like people like authors and speakers, like, oh, my
Mhm.
book's coming out. I have to like pitch my book. And then I don't remember when, but I just started to have this like different mindset of like, wait, this isn't about convincing anyone of anything. It's really about like creating the sense of connection and helping someone do more of what they want to do with what I have. So I would love for you to talk about your perspective on sales and what that really means, because I think that for most of us in most of our careers and businesses, a lot of what we do is sales. We may not
Mhm.
call it that.
Mhm. I'll build on your point, Natalie. It isn't just authors and entrepreneurs who react viscerally to the word sales. I would say at least half the people that are actively engaged as salespeople go to great lengths and contort themselves to call it something else. I'm an account executive. I'm in business development. I'm a relationship manager. So it's just, we have this gut reaction to the idea of sales because it carries with it so much baggage. But in reality, when I look at you and you say like, I don't know how I feel about sales, you've been selling your whole career. Whether you were on the finance side of the world as an entrepreneur, you're selling. Daniel Pink has a great book called To Sell is Human,
Mm-hmm.
and he posits the idea that something like 85% of the people in the world are engaged in sales, if you define it broadly. Even a teacher in a classroom is engaged in sales to a degree because he or she is convincing children or students to give their attention in exchange for something valuable. So
What
we're
a
all
great,
selling. Yeah.
yes, what a great example. Yes. So tell us how you think of sales.
I think of sales as I do believe that in sales there is a part of it that's about persuasion. And I think that's very important because you are there. If you're hired to sell, you're an economic driver. You're there to change an outcome in some way. And it doesn't have to mean that you're taking somebody to a place that they don't want to or don't need to go. But you are trying to persuade. You are trying to get turn a no into a maybe into a yes into action. And I think it's actually a very noble profession. It takes a lot of courage, right? You have to get up and face rejection like an actor going on auditions every week. It's a rejection business. But the people who are good at it find joy in it, and they find a way to close the gap between who they are as a salesperson, who they are professionally, and who they are personally. They operate from a place of
Mm.
authenticity, and it can be a very happy business that way.
Okay, there's a couple things in that I want you to elaborate on. The first is the business of rejection. I never thought about it that way, but you're 100% right. So you've run your own business, you faced enough rejection yourself, but you also train salespeople. Rejection is, I mean, this is something everyone struggles with, right? And I'd love for you to share your perspective on how, whether someone is selling or pitching or, worried about raising their hand at a company meeting or a team meeting, like,
Mhm.
give us what's a helpful way for us to think about rejection so that we can tap into the courage so it doesn't become this stamp of, oh my God, I'm rejected, I failed, this is
Mhm.
terrible, that's it.
Yeah, I was speaking at a client meeting last week, and another speaker was up, and she said something that I absolutely love. She said, "Failure is a bruise, not a tattoo."
Mm,
And I think that for a lot of the young people in the business, especially, they go through a sale fell through, or a client backed out, or something awful happened, or God forbid there was some layoffs at their company. And to them, the perspective is, overwhelming, right? The rejection is overwhelming. The sense of failure is overwhelming. And I think that, first of all, like, if you're a manager or you're a guide or a mentor to someone in that position, it's like being able to give them the gift of perspective, right? Being able to kind of like stretch the clock out, say like, look, this is going to happen at different points across your career. This is a business of ups and downs. You're on the roller coaster. So sort of giving them that kind of perspective can be truly helpful. And I think that the advice that I give to salespeople, to managers, and so forth is that you can never control the outcome. You can literally do everything right, and the ball will bounce the other way. Other times you'll get lucky. All you can control is your effort and your intent. And that intent comes down to in accordance with like what Simon Sinek always talks about. It comes down to the why. Why am I doing this? Right? Am I going into this sale thinking of my customer as a target or a mark, or someone to have something taken from them and to be outfoxed or outmaneuvered? Or am I going into this as someone who is trying to actually be of help to this customer? Do I feel like
mm,
the thing that I'm selling them, the service that I'm offering, do I have the ability to make them better? Do I have the ability to help them? And if you're going to work every day with, positive intent, right? If you're able to operate from a place of generosity and some humility and some grace, it gives you the courage follows that. The ability to kind of the ability to be resilient follows that.
mm. This reminds me, and I think I shared this story with you when we were chatting before. It reminds me, I gave a keynote a couple of years ago, and it was a sales kickoff for a company, a tech company, and they were actually a cybersecurity company. And and as part of my talk, I talk a lot about connecting to your bigger why, right? So, how is what you're doing, the sales or the relationship, contributing to something bigger than yourself? And after the keynote, this gentleman came up to me and he had tears in his eyes. He kind of looked like this big, kind of tough guy. He had tears in his eyes and he said, I just want to thank you. I've been with this company for 15 years and I've done really well. I've loved my work. I love my clients. I've built a really great life for my family. But I'm so excited to leave here today and go home and tell my two sons that what their father does for a living is not selling cybersecurity software. But what I do for a living is I keep the country safe because
Mm.
most clients are in the government. He said, and I never really connected that until I heard you speak. He said, I've been selling cybersecurity software to the government of the United States for the last 10 years. And that's actually what I do because when they buy our software, our systems are safer. We are safer as a country. And he said, and today I'm going to go home and I'm going to tell my sons that what I do for work is I help to keep our country safe. And he was crying. And that's the impact, isn't it, Doug? Like when we can connect to the real purpose for what our efforts help someone else do,
Hmm.
like that's the real ignition for
Yeah.
courage, resilience, authenticity.
First, I absolutely love that story. I can connect to it in a different way. I don't feel like we're keeping the country safe, but we do remain connected to the idea that the internet, the web, digital technology, right, is transforming life around us, right, and sometimes for the better, and often sometimes for the worst. But all these people that are engaged in sales in this whole world, they're funding that, right? They're creating the economic fuel to keep that going and
Mhm.
doing things for people. So you can connect to that. You can connect to belief in your company, belief in your leaders. Right? You can look at your company as something that is creating economic opportunity for a lot of people. It's giving them a good career. So there's a lot of things you can connect to, but it takes a little bit of extra consideration, right? It takes a little bit of extra time, and it's the opposite of cynicism.
Yes.
One lesson. So one of the things one of the several things that I do for work is I coach. I think it's about 50 different executives in our industry, right? So these are folks, and I'll talk to them once a month and have a regular check-in, and talk about them leading. They're all sales leaders. Talk about them leading their teams. And when you talked about kind of putting meaning into that guy's job, right? One of the things that routinely I'll ask them, and it always freaks them out when somebody has just made the transition, for they're 33 years old or something, and they've gone from being a salesperson to being a manager. And they'll say, "Oh, well, how do we get started?" I say, "Okay, the first thing I want to talk about is your legacy." They're like, "I just,
What a great question, Doug.
I just unpacked my coffee mug. What are you talking about my legacy?" And I put this question to them. I say, okay, so I want you to imagine, you know, one of the people that is on your team today, right? Just somebody who's in the middle of the pack. And and it's 7 years from now, and you're getting together with them. You work in different places now, and you're sitting with him or her, and she says, "Hey, Natalie, the time that we spent together, at company X, that made such a difference in my career. That was, that really made me who I am. Thank you." And I say, can you get to that place? Can you stop and think about that? Now, I want you to kind of work backwards and say, why are they saying that? What are you doing today that they're going to remember in 7 years? Are they going to remember that you fought hard to get them a lower number on their quota, or that you sort of kicked down a door on some internal argument that nobody really is going to remember or care about? No, what they're going to remember is, Natalie, you challenged me to do something that I didn't know I could do.
Hmm.
You pushed me. You called me on my bullshit. You you
Yep.
you you pushed me to be better at what I do. You made me care about things on a deeper level. That's the stuff that lasts.
It's very, very powerful. Doug, this is making me, reminding me years ago, actually, it was my grandma, my mom's mom was my grandma. She had just passed away. And we organized this memorial service dinner, and my grandparents had lived in this kind of senior citizen home. So all their friends came. And this one young person stood up to give a toast. He definitely didn't live there. Turns out he's a son of someone who was their neighbor. And he gets up and he said, so many wonderful things have been said about Mira, my grandma. But he said, I've only met her once in my life because I didn't live here. My dad lived here, my parents lived here. He said, but one time I was visiting them, and it was actually the lowest point in my life because actually he lost a child. They had an accident, he lost a child.
Mm.
He said, and I was coming out of their apartment and I was walking to the elevator, and Mira was also walking to the elevator. And we stood by the elevator, and it was a very slow elevator, so it took a while. And he said, I was obviously distraught. And she turned to me and she said, she'd known my parents. She said, how are you? What's going on? And he said, I just told her we had this tragedy. She said, and I'll never forget, she put her arm on my shoulder and she just looked at me with such love and care and just stood there, like being with me in that moment. He said, that was years ago.
Mm.
That was the only time I ever met her. but I'll never forget that kind of kindness. And I remember listening to that, and I had this moment of, we all leave a daily legacy, not just a
Mm.
legacy over time, but my grandma left a legacy that day. So I think what you're saying is so powerful, just for everyone listening, because this is what the lesson I'm taking away, to kind of step back and think about that in our actions and our interactions. This thing that I'm, as you said, like this thing that I'm spending a lot of energy on right now, is this important? Is this going to matter as a daily legacy, a weekly legacy 7 years from now? I think it's very powerful. I want you to also talk about, you mentioned this, I think it's so important that, the best salespeople, they get rid of that kind of compartmentalization between their personal self and their professional self. Can you talk about that? I think this is such an essential practice actually for everyone. I'd love for you to give that your perspective on that.
So I have to tell a story here as we kick off this part of the conversation. So one of the things that I did for many, many years, I still do occasionally, is go and do an in-person sales training program, full day. In fact, your wonderful husband Avi has been in a few of my classes over the years, which is how we got to know each other.
Well, that's how we have to. Let's just do a shout out to Avi on this podcast, because he considers you his mentor, and anytime he got to interact with you, he would come home full of so much like inner fuel. So thank you, Avi, for making this connection.
Well, absolutely. Thank you, Avi. And going back, so this was probably has to be at least 15 or 20 years ago. I'm in this class and I'm teaching this group, and there's a tables full of, I don't know, 30 or 40 people. And there was a guy in the second row, and he was, a little bit older sales guy, and he's nodding his head a lot and so forth. He's really taking a lot in, and he comes up to me at the break and he says, "Doug, I need your advice." He says, "So I want my customers to think that I care. What's a good strategy for that?" And I stopped. And first of all, I thought he was pulling my leg, because I thought, no, this is a plant. He's going to break out in a big smile in a second here. But he was dead serious. And I just looked at him and I said, "Have you thought about caring? Could you actually give a crap and want to do good for them? I mean, think about how, consider how hollow this or any other job can be if it's pretense, right? If it's just about the numbers, if it's just about the treadmill of this quarter, next quarter, this sale, next sale, et cetera, trying to do some good along the way. So that's where, it links back to the point we were making earlier about, intent, right? Why are you in it? Do you, one thing I challenge people to do frequently is, especially in those who are selling media and ad technology, it can all seem very removed from reality.
Yes.
It can just seem like a big bunch of numbers. And what I encourage them to do, and that's part of the origin of our company's name, Upstream Group, is like, like follow that opportunity uphill a little bit. Go and look at, what does the company do, right? Get inside their situation. Who are they competing with? What are they trying to do? What do they believe in? How do they treat their employees and so forth? And if you can get connected to like, hey, this is a company or it's a brand that is doing some good things, and I want to support those good things, and I want to help them succeed, right? I want to do a good, honest day's work for them. The business actually gets a lot more interesting, right? And it allows you to operate from a genuine place. And I think that when you look at the values, and I know you and I have talked about values, and I know that like you have your own values. One of those, which is you talked about in a podcast I listened to a little while ago, was the value of action, of like taking the action so you don't regret later the things you don't do. But if you connect with your values and operate from there, it's energizing. And one of the key values is curiosity, right? Followed by humility, followed by service, and a little bit of optimism. And so one of the things that I routinely talk to managers about, and also to teams, is starting out with that foundation, right? Like, what do you believe? Who do you think you really are when you're at your best, right? Get in touch with those things, and then let those things guide a lot of your daily decisions. If you do it for the right reasons, frequently it'll end up being the right decision. And even when it's not, right? You'll still feel good about it. You'll still find growth and renewal out of it.
That's right, because you're aligned with who you are, right? You're not in dissonance. You know, Doug, this makes me think of one of my favorite stories about sales, which is not about sales. And I don't know if you've heard this, but I talk a lot about it when I in my mentorship work with leaders. So Wayne Dyer, he's passed away now, but he was a psychologist, best-selling author. His books have sold hundreds of millions of copies. One of my favorite stories that he shared was when he was trying to sell his first book. It was called The Erroneous Zones. He was just a psychologist at the time. He was not Wayne Dyer. He just was a regular person. It's very hard to get a book deal, as I should know, having written a bunch. So his agent somehow managed to get him a meeting with an editor at a big New York publishing house. So it was a really big deal. And Wayne Dyer goes to this meeting. And as he says, when he walked in, he noticed that the editor just seemed out of sorts. Like he wasn't quite fully paying attention. So instead of launching into his pitch, Wayne Dyer says, I'm a psychologist. If there's anything you wanted to talk about, I'm happy to do it. I'm here for you. And the editor actually opened up. Wayne Dyer doesn't share what it was, but he opened up. He was dealing with something. And they spent the entire half an hour for the meeting with Wayne Dyer listening. He never even talked about his book. And he leaves the meeting and he calls his agent, and his agents are screaming at him, I cannot believe you wasted this opportunity. That's it. I can't get you any more meetings. And 2 days later, they get a call from the editor who says, I don't even know exactly what this book is, but I want to work with someone like him. I want to work with someone like Wayne Dyer, who was so caring and so deeply present and so attentive that he noticed that something was going on. And the way he listened, he said, I don't even know what the book is. Let's do it. And it became his first New York Times bestseller. And from there, and I really love that story. To me, it speaks to what you just talked about. Like one of Wayne Dyer's core values was to really care, like really care about the person he's talking to. And so you might think that, oh, that was a bad sales meeting. He didn't even mention his book. That's crazy. But actually, he showed up as his true self and his most authentic self in service of this person, which made the editor go, wow, like I want to work with that person.
That's a great story, and there's a parallel in that to some of the things that I try to teach, sales teams and managers. And it's the idea that I'll crib a little bit from a book called The Challenger Sale, which I'm very fond of, where they say, you don't lead with your product, you don't lead with your offer, you lead the customer to your product, right, via their own situation. So I always say, you're making a movie here, but the movie's not about you. The movie's about the client. You come in the second reel. You come in chapter 3 as the sidekick. And so when we've developed this sales process called leading with needs, and what it's all about is, like, initially the first thing you do is show the client one slide or a piece of paper that has a few things about them written on it. Right? Hey, here's what I've done some research. Here's what I know about your situation so far. You're competing with this other company over here, and they're outspending you in the market. This is what's special about your product. This is an important event for you that's coming up, and so on and so on. What did I miss? Now the information's flowing, right? The customer's taking part. I say it's the moment where you and the customer get on the same side of the table. Right. And so you've created sort of an us in this environment. Wayne Dyer kind of like created that us from a very genuine place, right? Where it's like, you realize that, like, unless there was a connection between these two people, there wasn't going to be white space for anything else to happen. Right. And he had the added benefit of it being kind of the good human thing to do. But in this case, it's like, do your homework, hand it in, right? Have a reason to be there, right? Have a reason that's customer focused to be there. So this is what we call in our work the diagnosis, right? So, hey, Natalie, here, before I go on and tell you anything about our company, here's the potential problem that I think we can solve for you, right? What do you think about that, right? Is that the right thing to talk about or not? And even if it's not, you'll tell me what is, right? So the first part of the sales call is just all about the customer, right? It's all about them, their situation. And then you're able to actually sort of then demonstrate to them at a point where they'll care about the solution what it is that you can do for them, how you can help them, and so forth, right? So it's inverting the sales process, because what most people do when they get into sales, and what's ironic is that so many people who have been on the buyer side and have sat through really bad sales calls end up doing the same thing, which is the first thing they do is a lot of credentialing.
Yes.
Hey,
Yes.
here's how big we are. Here's a page of the clients that we've worked with, and here's how big we are versus like the other guys in here, and and these are the awards we've won, and this is where we have data centers around the country, and blah 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 blah. And it's the same stuff that everybody else does, and it's horrible,
I'm
right?
laughing so hard, Doug, I had to mute my mic because I know exactly what you're talking about. Yes. Uh-huh.
Oh, and it's just it's just so self defeating, right? Because also the person who is doing it feels kind of naked and exposed and like, wow, I barely care about this stuff. Why would they? Whereas the person who shows up and they're genuinely curious, right? They really want to know. I would say that, curious people are magnetic, right?
Mhm.
If you're interested, you'll be interesting. So I just am constantly telling people, just slow down, take a beat, right? Be curious, ask the second or third or fourth question, not because it's a strategy, but because you really want to know, and good things will happen. And what a
And I
great way
think
to spend 10 hours a day.
that's right. And I just think like and I love the story that you told about the salesperson who said, how can I appear that I care, which connects to this. You could just find something to care about. I like we as human beings have such a great BS filter. We just do. It's actually all of us are brilliant at it because we need it for survival. Within a half a second of meeting someone, our brain has decided if that person is safe to trust or not. It's the first
Mhm.
judgment that we make because it's life or death. And it's so interesting because, like, it's intrinsic to all of us. We all know what it feels like when someone is trying to, push us something or not really listening, and yet it's actually something we have to be really intentional about, of like tuning into that and saying, well, this is a conversation with another human being, whether I'm selling a software or a book, or for me, a lot of, as I'm listening and learning from you, the sales that I do, right? So I work with companies, but I also do a lot of mentorship with leaders. Both I run these reinventability accelerators, so that's a small group or one on one. And I always do what I call a discovery call, right? When someone's interested. And actually, my mentor used that word. So I took it from her. I love that it's a discovery call because I guess I'm naturally a curious person because I'm always excited to do it. Because I'm like, oh, this is interesting. It's this person I don't know very well. That's cool, right? And ultimately, it is about creating that human connection because unless we have that
Mhm.
human connection, it doesn't matter if I'm selling you, the secret to eternal life. I mean, okay, maybe for that we don't need it, but even for that, you'd need a human connection
Mhm.
because how do you know to trust me, right?
Yeah, exactly. One tactical thing that I suggest to a lot of clients is, every so often, with your best customer, right, or with somebody who you've had a tough time with, schedule a non-sales call with them.
Mm,
Tell them that it's like, this one is not about me selling you anything, right? In fact, stop me if I do hang up the phone, or shut off the Zoom connection if I start to sell my product to you. All I want to talk about on this in this meeting is process, right? I just want to talk about kind of like, how we do things together, right? What's working. I want you to be honest with me. I want to be able to be vulnerable with you, right? And it's like, think about the value of one truly honest conversation in the midst of like so much pressure. And believe me, I trust and respect salespeople. It's a very hard job, and they're under constant pressure. It's Tuesday, go sell this product. It's Thursday, go sell this audience, right? So they're constantly being pushed, from a lot of different, from towards a lot of bad behavior. But the good ones are the ones who stop and sort of, build that white space with their customer, right? And there's a lot of ways to do it. No one way is the right way. But boy, the ones who do, it's like they end up finding a lot of joy in this job, because the
mm.
job should be a lot of fun.
Well, right, because when we do something that feels to us like something we want to do, the outcome is much different. We actually show up very differently, right? One of the things that I learned about myself as I've, started to do more of these discovery calls, because I didn't used to, I used to speak and I have agents who handle that and my books and corporate. But one of the things I've noticed is that I have a mode that I can go into, and I call it the on stage mode. And
Mm,
where it feels very performative, right? Where I feel when you were talking, not just necessarily credentialing, but I feel like I have this thing and I need to perform so you can see how great it is. And I noticed that sometimes that's the mode I go into, which is I don't like to be in that mode. I'm not at my best in
mhm.
that mode. I don't want to be on the other side of that mode. So I think just having the awareness, I wonder if you could talk about something you said at the beginning, like it feels very naked and vulnerable to be doing that.
Mhm.
Why do we do that? Not
Mhm.
just salespeople, right? Like people going for an interview, right? Like I work with a leader who's been interviewing
Yeah.
for a much more senior leadership role in her company. And she said she felt that way. She feels like I'm going into these performing. I don't feel good doing that. Why do we do
Mhm.
that? And then how do we
Yeah.
switch out of that?
I have an anecdote to share on that. So I think I've now been doing this for 26 years, and 22 of those years were rooms of people, and and symposiums, and training courses, and then more recently a lot more on Zoom, and other screen share platforms, as you'd imagine. I think I've been doing it for 6 or 7 years, and I was pretty successful. And I pride myself on, like, a daily workshop that we would do. There'd be a lot of fun, and there'd be, like, be some good stuff, good energy happening, and so forth. And I remember finishing this workshop one day, and I was in New York, and would always, like, find time to go have a drink or a dinner with a friend afterwards. So a buddy of mine in the industry who'd hired me a few times, he and I got together, and he said to me when we sat down and having a beer, he said, so how was today? Right? Did you tell him this? Did you tell him that? Like, did they laugh when you did this? And so on and so on. And Natalie, I kind of just had this out of body experience, because I thought to myself, like, oh shit, I've been doing this wrong this whole time. Right. Because I had been focused on kind of my performance. What do they,
Mm-hmm.
like, what do they think of me, right? I mean, do they think
Yes.
I'm funny? Do they think I'm engaging, right? Do they think I'm smart, and so on and so on? And I felt like the first time that I really owned this role, right, was when I completely externalized it. From that, and literally the change was almost immediate, right? Where I started to become the host and not the entertainer. And so what started happening literally the next day, because I had another workshop scheduled the next day, I changed my whole way of living in that moment. I started to kind of say, like, hey, you in the second row, what's your name, right? Tell me, like, I haven't heard from you so far, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on what's going on here, right? So if you think about yourself as a host, right, then what are you doing, right? You're making people feel seen and heard and understood. You're bringing them into the conversation. You're making them, you're accounting for them, and suddenly those attending skills, right, which were 20 years ago, they were a best practice, right? And now today in this world, they're a survival skill. This morning, I did a workshop on Zoom for 67 people in 5 different countries, and kind of holding that group together and making them feel seen and understood when their little yearbook
Mm-hmm.
photos on a page, right? And bringing them into the conversation and making them feel heard. Boy, what a great gift I was given when I had that realization all those years ago about shifting that perspective, because today, God, how much that matters.
Mm. I love Doug. I really love that, and isn't it interesting where the gifts come from? We just have to pay attention because they come. It wasn't a client who gave you feedback. It was a
Mm-hmm.
friend asking you a casual question that, because you were paying attention, the lesson was there. That's quite powerful. I can relate to that in my mentorship work because I am I'm very comfortable on stage. I do a lot of keynote speaking, and on stage, I am the entertainer. I'm the person, right?
Mhm.
All eyes on me. If it's a smaller stage, I'm really interactive. I call on people, but usually it's 1,000 people. There's not a lot of interaction. And when I started doing these small group mentorships with leaders or one-on-one, I think I stayed in that same mode. And
Mhm.
let me teach you. And from, just like I'm sure you did, from a really good intention. I just want to impart this wisdom on you.
Mhm.
And I had this moment, I don't remember what my turning point was. But when I look now, I actually was saying this to Avi, my husband, the other day, because I'm leading right now a reinventability accelerator. It's happening now, and I do it on Zoom, where I came out of one of the sessions and I said to Avi, wow, I talk so much less now. I'm like, I talk like 10% of what I used to talk. They talk. I pose questions, I nudge, as I call it, I lovingly agitate, but they talk.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
isn't it so transformative? And I love this as a metaphor for sales or for sharing something, our book or our work or our writing or whatever it is with others, where we're not the performer. We're there to, like, I have this visual of like embrace the person into that space so
Mhm.
that they can experience in the best way. So I love that. I think that's very powerful. Um, and it's such a, again, I think it transcends sales. It's for any of us who are with others, right? And we have something that we want them to experience or something to share. What a flip. We don't have to perform the dance.
Yeah. Well, it's like, it's a nice segue back to your story about Wayne Dyer, right? Where, he chose to be human in the moment, right? He chose to stop and be kind and listen to someone and, solicit someone's, input and bring them back in, And I think that, I think that I can do that on my best days and my best moments, and none of us only have good moments, but it's something to aspire to, and I really do feel like, especially at this stage of my career, I want what I do to matter, right?
Mm.
And somebody coming away from a workshop or a coaching session saying like, "Oh, that Doug Weaver, he's so smart or so clever, or he said this thing that was so funny." And it's like, no, 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 no. Like, somebody coming away and saying like, hey, they felt really seen,
Mm.
in the moment, that they felt understood, right? That they felt somehow empowered, right? That's what matters. That's what I want them to be talking about in 7 years.
And that's, it's I think of this is when we shift from our ego self, right? Which is that, it just wants approval and it wants to feel good because it's very scared, which is
Mm-hmm.
necessary. It's a necessary part of us. If we didn't have ego, we literally couldn't survive. But it's a shift out of that and into our higher self, which is
Mm-hmm.
the part of us, the all of us have it, where we really, like, the thing that makes us feel the best is to have a positive like contribution in some way on someone else.
Mm-hmm.
That is it. That's, if you think about, like, I was just saying this to someone, like, if you think back, actually, listeners, do this right now. Like, think back through the last year, some of your best moments at work, outside of work, like, what comes to mind? The thing that comes to mind are, we're with other people, or we're
Mm-hmm.
contributing in some way. Something we do helps someone, elevates someone, helps them feel better, okay? Those are our best moments, because I think that we that is part of who we really are. And then sometimes that ego self takes over, and we get
Mm-hmm.
into performance and we want the funniest and the smartest tag. And I think awareness, right? It's so
Mm-hmm.
much of what you and I are
Yeah.
talking about, is just having that awareness and intent, as you said.
And I'm going to quote my wife, who's one of the smartest people who I have ever met, and one of the wisest. And I remember her talking about, parenting, when we were younger parents, and she said, "You can't schedule it, In
Mm.
other words, like you can't say like, okay, on at Thursday at 6 p.m. we're going to sit down and we're going to have a meaningful conversation with our kid about X, Y, and Z, right? It's like, no, it's going to happen when it's going to happen.
Hmm.
And as a manager, as a colleague, as a boss, whatever, you have to you have to realize that, like, those really memorable moments, that opportunity to, like, sit down side by side with somebody, like, that's going to happen in an instant, right? You have to be open to it. So one of the concepts that I talk to managers about a lot is like, okay, well, now that you have a distributed workforce and you're only together 2 or 3 days a week, and even then you're still kind of in different places. um, what's your how do you walk the floor? How do you remain present for them, right? How do you create those white spaces where that connection could happen,
Mm.
right? And then to be wise enough to do that consistently and just be a presence, and not to be talking all the time, not to be trying to, like, not to have an agenda, right? um, so it's like, so much of it, one of the things that you and I talked about in our previous conversation was, what does that kind of healthy ecosystem look like, right? If you're a manager, you should be thinking, not about kind of like taking that employee and making them this much better at their job, or taking that one and kind of reducing, this thing that they're bad at, and so forth, rather, but rather, like, focusing on the health of the environment that those
Mm.
people are operating in. And I have a really simple formula for that. It's connection times empathy over, I'm sorry, connection times empowerment over empathy, right?
Mm.
So it's like, hey, make everybody feel seen and heard and understood as best you can. Flood the zone with empathy, and then just focus on empowering people and connecting them to what matters, connecting them to the values, connecting them to the strategies, connecting them to the vision for the future. And it's like, if you just focus on the health of the system that they're operating in,
Hmm.
that system will raise all boats. That system will make everybody whole. And and it makes your job as a manager easier, because you're not just putting out fires all the time. People start to think for themselves. They get creative. They think like problem solvers, right? They show up ready to, like, make something good happen. And then it becomes a lot of joy.
It's really beautiful. And it's a really beautiful way to think about it. Reminds me, I always, these stories come to mind. I got a temp job when I was in college, like literally through a temp agency, like working for some biotech company, like typing. I don't know. I was like literally typing stuff
Mhm.
up. And eventually, I was working outside the office of the CEO, and I started talking to him, and he was a really good human. He sort of took me under his wing. But I remember a couple weeks in, he took me, he said, "Come here, I want to show you something." And he took me in the back, and it was all these like medical equipment and all kinds of, like, they were doing a lot of research. And he said, "Do you know what we're doing here?" And I knew, like, overall they were working on a something for the heart. But he said, he called one of the lab technicians, and he said, "Tell Natalie what you're doing." And I actually don't remember what the guy said, but he explained he was looking at a part of a heart to understand how their device could help. And then Frank, that was the CEO's name, he turned back, he looked at me, he said, "I just want you to understand, this is what you do." And I was like, "Huh? That's not what I do. I'm typing, data entry every
Mhm.
day." He's like, "No, this is what you do. You're part of this." And
Mhm.
that's the point, isn't it? Because I was then part of this ecosystem of, we were doing something meaningful. He helped me in that moment connect to the why. So I
Mhm.
wasn't no longer, and I was 17 years old. So I'm not sure I had deep thoughts about this, but I do remember I'm still in touch with the CEO and the COO. It's been more than 30 years. We're still in touch. But he gave me that gift in that moment of, like, as you said, showing me
Mhm.
what I am part of. And so he didn't have to worry about motivating me to type, right? He motivated me by helping me connect, because he created this ecosystem where everyone was part of the solution for the heart, even though, I mean, my job was typing numbers. So I think
Mhm.
that's really beautiful, Doug. And I love, like, ending on that. One last word of wisdom from you. So, I know a lot of listeners, to kind of circle back to the beginning, they're either, launching a new business or working on something new or a new book, or thinking about a career pivot, or maybe, stepping into something else, and they have trepidations. They may not think about it as sales, but putting yourself out there. What's your kind of closing piece of wisdom when someone feels that, like, oh my God, I'm going to go for it, and they're going to say no, and I'm going to feel terrible, and maybe I shouldn't even do it?
Yeah, it's interesting, the concept of reinvention, right? And just last night, my wife said, let's watch this documentary on Martha Stewart. And honestly, I kind of said, yeah, I'm sure it's good. I don't know if I'm in the mood for Martha Stewart, tonight, right? And of course, as happens 9 out of 10 times, right? It was like turned out to be absolutely fantastic, and I loved it. And she said something. I wrote this down on the spot. Wrote it down on my phone. She said, "When you're through changing, you're through."
Mm.
So it's accepting this idea of reinvention. Reinvention and change can be fuel, or it can be weight. So if you choose to use it as fuel, right, then you are, you're going towards something, right? And the advice that I give people is, like, first, it's like, get in touch with your own values, right? Decide the 4 or 5 qualities that are truly important to you, the things that you don't want to change, right? So what's important as you're changing is to know what's still true,
Mm-hmm.
right? In my own company, it's like we've had to, we have changed and pivoted, at least a half dozen times over the years. I'd say about every 3 years or so, we're in a different business. But the things that haven't changed is the things we believe in. The empowerment and the connection and the empathy and the optimism and the service. We haven't forgotten that. We haven't forgotten who we serve, right? Our customer is the chief revenue officer. It's the salesperson. It's that person who's kind of alone with their number in the middle of the night and wondering, like, how they're gonna make their goal, and and succeed. So we've never forgotten that stuff. So building a foundation of values and belief, right? That's your boat, right? You can go a lot of different places with the boat, right? And the other thing that I just love, because you have obviously been involved in a lot of very dynamic industries, right? And the work that Avi does, with Amazon and this larger industry that we're all a part of. And one thing that happens, not apropos of the question you asked, but it's something I did want to share. One thing that I hear a lot from customers is, well, Doug, yeah, come in and work with our team, right? But know that, like, some of our salespeople are really experienced, right? Like, they've been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years, right? They've been up and down. They've worked at this company and that company and so forth, right? And I'll kind of listen patiently, right? But I'm thinking the whole time that in an environment like this, experience doesn't age like wine; it ages like fish.
What a great way to put it.
And so don't get too caught up in, like, the way that I'm doing it is the right way, the technique that I have, the contacts that I have, the process that I have. I've got it figured out. The day that someone says they've got it figured out is the day that they start to become irrelevant. So I try to kind of just through coaching and training and a little bit of mentoring and so forth. It's like I try to get people to, like, hey, build that strong foundation, right? Get those values and beliefs in order, right? Understand why you're doing what you're doing. Understand the things that truly matter to you, and keep that stuff constant. That doesn't change, right? That's going to be the ballast that's going to keep your boat going. And then, just be open to, like, a lot of the other stuff changing, because it will.
Because that's what it is. And that's why, what a great place to end on. I mean, that's why I started this podcast. That's why I'm doing all this work on reinvention, because it's an ongoing process. To be human is to reinvent, right? We don't have a choice, and it's a really fun skill to get really good at. It wouldn't it be great if we love doing this thing that we have to do anyway?
Why not? Why not? Life is short.
Life is short. Let's enjoy most of it. Doug, I'm so grateful for your insights, for your care. I learn a lot from you every time I talk to you, and I know our listeners are too. So thank you for sharing yourself and your time with us. And to our listeners, I really appreciate you, even though I can't see you. This is a new podcast, even though I've had a podcast before. I'm really grateful for you tuning in and sharing a piece of your mind and heart with us. So thank you for being here. And yeah, I'm just smiling so much. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see a big smile on my face because it is such a gift to have an opportunity to learn from someone like you, Doug. And I think the biggest gift you've given us is I feel this feeling of like encouragement and empowerment to like always be a better host in whatever
Hmm.
situation I'm in, including in my house. And one day I do hope I get to meet you in person. If you're in Boston, come say hi.
We'll make it happen. We'll make it. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And now we've put Doug's website and you can learn more about him. It's all in our show notes. So I encourage you to go learn more about Doug and his work there. And with that, I will see and be in your ear on our next episode.